So Joe, for those who are watching this, and I guess those who don't know much about you, I'll let you introduce yourself to our listeners. And what is it that you do? What's your role? And what does a typical day look like for you?
Yeah. So, hey, first off, thanks for setting up this chat. But I'm Joe Nguyen, and I'm a state senator in Washington in the 34th Legislative District, which is the southwest part of Seattle. First Vietnamese senator in all of Washington state, and one of the first legislators, myself and Nguyen Thai came in together. And like I said, our legislature is part-time, but really I wasn't involved in politics until about a couple of years ago. And this area is kind of weird where there's definitely a lot of folks who want to run for office, but I ran because I was from the community. I believe that a lot of the voices that needed to be heard at the table weren't being heard. So I jumped in a couple of years ago after the last election that did not go very well, because I wanted to make sure that our issue was worthy of being discussed. So I work on a lot of justice issues. I work on a lot of equity issues. I happen to work on a lot of tech issues as well, just because of my background. But for me, the most important part is making sure that our government works for us and that it supports people. Because my family were refugees, like a lot of people probably listening. And because we had access to public housing, access to public schools, had access to public health, we were able to survive and then thrive. And, for other Vietnamese people out there, I think, most folks have heard the same thing, is that when you grow up, you're supposed to be, a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Yeah. So I'm kind of the black sheep of my family. I got into politics. My sister's an engineer. My, brother's a doctor. My other sister's an IT consultant. Yeah. And I do what I do now, but yeah. It's a lot of work. My day to day, I have 3 kids, so I start at about 5:30. Yeah. Getting everybody ready, try to answer emails. I work pretty hard until like 3, switch over to some state stuff that I do until like 8 or 9, get the kids down, and then I'm up until like 1 o'clock doing other things as well. So that's kind of how you have to be when you're a person of color or a person new to this space, is that you can't just show up and like exist. You have to be the best at it. And I think a lot of folks may resonate with that, because we don't have a narrative. And also we don't have the luxury of being mediocre. And I'm used to working multiple jobs because you have to survive.
Yeah. So talk to me about kind of your transition when you graduated to getting involved with politics, because let's face it, it's so rare to see Asian Americans getting involved, and let alone running for office. So I'm curious to know, like, what was it that triggered you, and what really inspired you to do so?
Well, I think, so I'll take a step back and I'll give you the actual instance where I thought I had to run. But, for our communities, because we were so focused on surviving, getting involved in a community was not really a thing beyond like your church or something like that, because at least my parents, and I'd imagine probably yours and others that came over in the 70s and 80s, they were working so hard just to exist. So you don't have that much time. Yeah. So civic engagement is not really a cultural thing that we have, especially when it involves like politics, because a lot of our families came from, and this is part of the conversation later, a culture where politics was seen as very, very bad and potentially detrimental. So you were actually discouraged from getting involved in kind of that stuff. Yeah. But all my life, I had been really involved in the community. In Washington State, I do a lot of work on alleviating homelessness. I did a lot of work on police accountability, and making sure that we had kind of access to, say, for instance, education and health for people. And that was just like through nonprofits and day-to-day and stuff like that. Yeah. Fast forward a little bit, there was a young man named Tommy Lay who was shot in South King County, about a block from where I went to high school, for essentially holding a pen. And obviously it seemed like he was going through a mental health crisis. I don't think death was necessarily the right path. So through that experience, the Vietnamese community was outraged, and they needed an outlet to help figure out what was going on. Yeah. And since I had been pseudo involved, got more involved in that sense, and helping his family kind of navigate that path. We organized around it. And saw the great need in our community to have somebody just at the very least, guiding us through this path. Yeah. But I'll be honest, I think one of the main reasons why I was triggered into running for office was because for so long, we were told that we weren't going to be good enough, right? Like, I don't know if anybody else out there, but, despite having like a 4.0 GPA, student body president, all this stuff, yeah, you were never going to be good enough. And that's how I felt. I still have imposter syndrome sometimes. Right. And I'm starting to have like the opposite, because as I was advocating for things like police accountability, advocating for things like homelessness issues, advocating for what's called trauma-informed care,
Yeah.
I would meet local leaders, whether they were state, county, or whatnot.
Yeah.
And honestly, I was just disappointed. Like, it's okay to like not know a subject area, but it was clear that some folks were not quite, as sharp as I think they could have been. And these are the folks that are running our government. These are the folks that are in charge of things that impact us the most. And I honestly got mad. I was like, I can't believe this level of mediocrity in people who are supposed to be helping us out. And if they aren't able to take care of these things, there's no way they're going to take care of our issues. Right. So I was a combination of pissed off about what I was seeing. Also, all this time I was told that I was never going to be good enough to be in this space. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to run. That's a very gross oversimplification. But I ran against 11 people in a race for the state Senate. And during that time, I was told, you're not going to win. You're not going to raise enough money. You won't have any of the support. And in my mind, I was like, well, I think I'm doing this the way that you're supposed to. I'm engaging people. I'm talking to the community, and I'm raising money in a way that I thought was morally, best. Basically, not taking corporate money. And in a race that was very contentious, very, very hard, I won out of 11 people. They were right 2 out of 3 times. I wasn't going to raise enough money, and I wasn't going to have any support. But I won by 17%. Won the primary outright against 11 people, and I won by 17%. And we've been keeping that momentum going as well. So I got involved because I was pissed off, and I thought that our community deserved more. And so far I've been right. So it's good. It's good to see.
Specifically as a Vietnamese American, I know that the young generation is having to have a lot of these tough and confrontational conversations with our immigrant parents over the issues of Black Lives Matter, racial inequalities, and just overall anti-Asian hate crimes at just unprecedented levels, right? And I think it's fair to say that the older generation tends to be a bit more conservative, and the young generation tends to be a bit more liberal. So I guess my question to you is that why is it so important for young Asian Americans to care about these issues and speak up? And what advice would you give so that they can have respectful and yet meaningful conversations with their elders?
Yeah, I don't know my answer is going to be perfect, but here, the reason why you need to get involved, because this is our future, right? And even taking one step back, whenever I have elementary school kids come visit my office, or whenever I talk to high schoolers or middle schoolers, I will always tell them that I'm actually closer in age to them than I am to most of the people that I work with. So I'm closer in age to elementary school kids than most of the people that I work with, just because of the way that our legislature is set up, which means that most of the things that we're talking about and doing today isn't going to impact the generations that are in power right now. It's going to impact future generations like us. So if we want to see a better future, we have to be engaged, and we have to be the ones pushing for that change, because we're the ones going to be impacted by it. And that's one of the main reasons. And as it relates to kind of what's happening with our elders, you're right. It is a tough conversation. I'll be honest, when I was running for office, the hardest demographic of people to get support from, or the ones that I had the most problems with in terms of, hate, like honestly hate mail or emails or comments. I was called very horrible things by Vietnamese elders just because I was running as a Democrat. Were elder Vietnamese people, the people that are supposed to be empowering us in the first place. And they would say things that are very problematic because of racial undertones or because of their experiences leaving the war. And honestly, the thing that I kind of left with was that we need to organize the younger generation. We need to organize generations that are going to impact in the future. Not that we ignore the elders that have done so much for us to be here, but I just found that most of my energy and effort was more valuable in the sense that I should be empowering leaders for the future. I've tried to stay in touch, and there's organizations in the elders community that we try to work with, even though we know that their views and backgrounds are different than ours. But I found very little value in that, just because anytime you try to engage, I get called, communist all the time. Or they, for some reason, the Vietnamese newspapers, they know of AOC, and they don't like, right? They're like, oh, I heard you're like AOC and that's evil, right? Like you're not going to be able to have productive conversations when that's the level of engagement you're going to have. So you love them, and you move forward. And one of the ways that I kind of think about it and helps me rationalize it so I don't get so angry is that we know about trauma-informed care. So I don't know if most folks know about trauma-informed care, but there's something called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So when you grow up with a lot of trauma, your mind, changes in a way that that basically is survival mode.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, because of that, you have behavioral outcomes later that are not positive. So if you look at people who are escaping war, who've been under oppressive regimes, who even when they got to the United States had a very difficult life, they have a higher propensity for a whole host of things. So I when I see these elders in the community who are not very nice, I'm just like, they went through a lot of trauma, and this is kind of how they deal with it. And this is basically a factor of PTSD. And if they feel that there's a link between, the oppressive regime that they had in Vietnam with a certain part of the United States, you're not going to undo decades of trauma. So you love them, you move on, and you focus on the future generations, because that's where your values be most impactful. At least with my parents, I helped them vote, and I walked through the issues, and we kept it agnostic of politics, and generally we obviously lean left. So my parents are a bit more sympathetic because it took years and years and years and years of conversations to get to that point. But you're not going to change somebody's mind in the next 45 days for Biden, Harris, or Trump when you know that that's their perspective.
No, I like the way how you internalize those pressures, because I can't imagine the type of pressures that you're going through from our Vietnamese community, and it's tough. And I applaud you for for sticking to it and reminding yourself what your values are. So
and that's what the hardest part. And this is just kind of me griping at this point.
Yeah, that's okay.
The Vietnamese community actually is pretty tight knit, man.
Yeah, they are.
Like, I don't care if you attack me. Like, I'm fine. I get death threats and all that stuff, but oftentimes they'll go to my mom.
Oh,
they'll say things to my mom, and you're just like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, but again, you love them. You're fighting for the community. I believe they were wrong, but I'm more focused on how do we have a better and just future instead of trying to dwell on things in the past that I can't control, right? So at the very least, as a state legislator, I know that one of the biggest gripes is the relationship with China and Vietnam. I have very little control over that.
Yeah.
But I have control over their access to healthcare.
Yeah.
And have access to, like, say, for instance, amount of taxes they have to pay or social services that we have.
Yeah.
So it's just weird, man. Like, the things that they hate me for, I have zero control over, and it's not even my jurisdiction. So you just move forward.
I want to talk to you about microaggressions, because I think you mentioned that. So I read an article on HuffPost last April that you actually dealt with this from other Republican state senators after you passed your first bill. And even today, I think a lot of us are oftentimes usually, desensitized by these microaggressions, and a lot of them are just coming up more and more now. So I know personally, I would get these questions that says, "Oh, Huy, where are you from?" Like, no, where are you really from? And in some cases, when I know they're just trying to be ignorant, I would reply with, I came from my mom, and I'll just leave it at that, right? So what kind of strategies do you have for handling these types of microaggressions when they occur?
It's tough. It's tough switching from the private sector, meaning personal private sector, to the public sector, because I think for me, my life has largely been spent trying to assimilate, because that's what we were taught growing up. And my last name is the most popular name in King County, I think all of Washington State, and one of the most popular probably in the United States at this point, right? And when people bastardize it on purpose, they know how to say it, right? Like, Americans, know how to say Daenerys Targaryen, right? Like, you can say Nguyen, you know what I mean? Like, it's not within the realm of possibility to learn how to say our last name. Yeah. And that was kind of the source of some jest. And, some people do it ignorantly. Some people do it because they feel like you have this connection with them. What's interesting is that the senator who made fun of my last name is actually very popular in the Vietnamese community here, because he's a known Trumper, and he's very Catholic as well, which Vietnamese people here are very Catholic. So he goes to church down in South King County with a lot of folks. So he knows how to say it, and I think he was trying to do it in jest, but like, that's how internalized the microaggressions are. They will say and do racist things and think that it's just like funny, right? Like, it's just okay. And before, I think I would have just been like, smile it off. and like dealt with it, even though they know that so for me, the reason why that's such a big deal is if they don't even bother to learn how to say your name, if they don't bother to learn about your background and who you are as a person, I have very little confidence that they're going to fight for my issues and think that I'm an equal. I think that's one of the most important things, is that we're always seen as lesser. Asian Americans, Vietnamese Americans are always seen as lesser, whether it's a cultural thing or whether it's a societal thing. And when you attack somebody like that, you're basically acknowledging, hey, you're lesser and it's funny. So I had to push back, and that's probably what you read a little bit in that article, where, you know, people were like, why are you making this such a big deal? And I'm like, because it is a big deal, right? Like, if you don't think that I'm worth acknowledging my existence, like, you're not going to partner with me on policies that I think will help my community. So the microaggressions that you deal with can be overt like that, or even more subtle within your own party, where you have to explain, you know, why you think certain things. And why like having to explain what systemic racism is, and being like, oh yeah, I'm never going to be able to fit this mold because that's just not me. I think one of the biggest conversations I had with my leadership that went really well was there are all these unwritten rules in the legislature, and I kept breaking them because I was like, this is stupid. I don't know why we're doing it this way. And I wouldn't get in trouble, but they would, you know, like, hey, you know, generally speaking, we would do this. Like, you're not supposed to support a person running against an incumbent, stuff like that. And I was like, well, if these rules are all unwritten and I'm not from this background, how the hell am I supposed to know what the rules are? Like, that by itself is systemically a problem, right? Like, we need to change the paradigm of how we lead, in the sense that acknowledging that the people that are here now are very different than the people who were here, and make it more inclusive. So that's kind of a big jump from, like, if they don't, you know, respect your name to how this impacts us. But I think the microaggressions that we deal with is exhausting, and honestly, I'll kind of bring it back. But the hardest parts, the ones that I have the hardest parts with, are when it's from your own community, whether it's people of color or Vietnamese elders and stuff like that. Because when you come from a background of scarcity, you kind of have a crab mentality sometimes as well. So I just want to put it out for folks who are thinking about running for office or in public service, is that it is okay to be exhausted. It is okay to feel like you're not always doing exactly what everybody wants, but that's what leadership is. And that's what doing the right thing means, is that you have to change the status quo. When you change the status quo, the people who benefit from it are not going to be happy. So that's kind of a big leap, but you know, it's a part of my life that I have to deal with. And it's a part of the life of a lot of folks who are first time, whatever, whether person of color, women, whatever, running for office.
No, I appreciate you standing up, and I think it just paves the way for more people to do so, and not just let these microaggressions, you know, take advantage of us. So I want to do one last thing with you. I want to do some just rapid fire questions, if that's okay. If you got some time, end the debate once and for all. Are these salad rolls or are they spring rolls?
They're spring rolls.
They're spring rolls.
They are spring rolls.
So what do you?
Anybody who calls fried egg rolls spring rolls, you're wrong. These are spring rolls.
All right, good. I just want to make sure we ended that debate. Next question for you. Iced Vietnamese coffee or hot Vietnamese coffee?
Oh, I do iced. But the condensed milk is delicious. Especially when you're in Vietnam. Oh, man. Like, I've gone a few times, and you just wake up in the morning, you have an iced drip coffee, and you're hanging out in like the humid air. It just feels so good. I do it iced. Iced.
And lastly, is Seahawks going to win the championship this year? Yes or no?
Oh man, you're like Russell Wilson. If you see the game against Atlanta, was on fire. Jamal Adams, like, everybody thought that, you know, the fact that we traded away so many first round picks, that dude is on fire. he's giving Russell Wilson the ammo he needs on the other side to be able to get our offense going as well. So we're gonna go far, and I think Russell Wilson deserves an MVP. He's just low key one of the best QBs in the league. So yes.
Wonderful. Senator Joe, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I just want to end this by saying, you know, I came across your slogan on your website that says politics is about people, not careers. And as an educator myself, I'd oftentimes tell my students to ask themselves, you know, what can I do, not just as a healthcare provider, but what can I do as a citizen to look out for those around me and my community, and how can I wake up and make someone's life a little better today? And that's one thing about you that really resonates with me. So I appreciate that.
No,
Well,
thank you.
thank you for all that you do in your community and being an inspiration to so many Asian Americans and young people across the country. And hopefully we'll be able to meet in person one day soon.
I mean, post-COVID, come up. It sounds like you know the area pretty well. So let me know.
Thanks so much, Senator Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good
All right.
day.